Every Tuesday we do this, and we talk about the 4 pillars of great leadership. And we hope to get you some knowledge and skills in to take you through today, or to at least bring into your daily life, so you can hopefully use the knowledge that you gain today immediately when you start working after this Zoom webinar is over. This Zoom webinar is being videoed, so if you don't want to be on the video, then please just turn off your video and you can listen in still. And it's all about performance leadership today. We have a topic that's named Leading Effectively in Low versus High Context Cultures. This, of course, will be presented by Dr. Okey Okere, and the reflection is being done by Graham Boyson. Okey, you might know him, is managing partner of the culture factor in Africa, and he's also the director of the BSN Impact Centre for Great Leadership. Graham is program advisor at Business School Netherlands in South Africa, and he's taking care of the international group of students that we've got. We started at 8:15, and we will stop sharp at 8:53. We will first do the presentation, and after that, Graham will reflect upon the presentation. And after that, there's the possibility to ask questions. You can put the questions in the chat room, or you can just raise your hand, and I will go through the screens to allow you to state your question. Please, Dr. Okey, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Twan, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to share my screen, and I want to confirm if everybody can see my screen. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Super.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Thanks.
Yes, good morning to everybody, and welcome everybody to today's Good Morning BSN. I'm going to make this brief presentation, but I will have to warn you, there is a lot that will be said, that should be said, that will not be said because of time. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and we can answer some of your questions directly. We're talking about leading effectively in low versus high context cultures. And we're going to explain what low context and high context cultures are. And then we will also go into that into more depth. So I'm going to also try to speak a bit slower than I normally speak, because I can imagine that my beautiful Nigerian accent might be a challenge for some of us. So I'll try my best to speak a bit slower than usual. All right, so I'm going to start with what I call the culture conundrum. Culture conundrum, this whole issue about culture. I want to first of all let you know that culture is perhaps the most referenced topic in management studies. There were about 2.4 million references to culture in management journals in 2021 alone. 2.4 million references. Culture is more topical than project management, than many other aspects of management. So it is something that we should consider as a very important topic in management. Now, talking about the studies around culture as well, when I did my doctorate thesis, when I submitted my thesis about 3 years ago, I had counted about 93 globally acclaimed models on culture, 93. And I bet you that if somebody was to do a study on culture now, they probably would add more to that. So there are over 93 models. The most popular models will be from Hofstadter, the founder of our organization. There's also Edgar Schein, which many of us may have heard about. There is Handy, there's Hall, there's Trompenas. There are many, many other people that have done work in the area of culture. So over 93 models from different scholars, and many of them are globally acclaimed. And then still talking about this issue about culture, there is a lot of confusion about the issue about culture. People sometimes confuse personality issues versus culture issues. When somebody is behaving in a very funny way, is it the person or is it the culture that the person comes from? Can we say that this individual represents the culture of Nigeria or the Netherlands or wherever the person comes from? So it's one of the challenges that we have with culture. And it's one of the reasons why culture studies sometimes, unfortunately, have been assumed to have racial discrimination undertones, because people do not sometimes understand how to properly dimension this conundrum of culture and understand it. And then there's also the issue of organizational culture versus national culture, i.e., I get into business school Netherlands and I see the way they behave in business school Netherlands, and I basically assume that all Dutch organizations are like that. Well, it is actually very possible that the behavior patterns you see in an organization might not represent the behavioral patterns of everyone in that country. So it's also important for us to understand that. To help us appreciate this conundrum a bit better, I would use this diagram to show you how to sort of like distinguish human behavior, so that when you relate with people, whether it's in a high context or a low context environment, which we shall come to in a bit, when you relate with people, you will be able to understand them much better. First of all, there's what we refer to as human nature. There are certain aspects of human behavior that are common to all human beings, regardless of which cultures they come from. For instance, if something great happens to you, something you always desire, like, you know, winning the lottery, for instance, winning a billion euros or $1 billion in the lottery, if you win that, there's every likelihood that you will be happy, regardless of the culture that you come from. If you get $1 billion into your account right away, there's every likelihood that you will be happy, regardless of what culture that you come from. But then the thing is, how you express happiness will depend on your culture, because your expression of happiness or sadness is an aspect of your life that is learned. You learn how to express it from the people around you. But the general feeling of happiness is natural to every human being. Same thing if you lose someone that you love. If you lose someone you love, you're bound to feel sad, regardless of which culture you come from. So human nature, it's important for us to understand that. We feel happy, we feel sad, we feel angry, we feel like something makes us laugh. All those things are human nature. How we express happiness, how we express sadness, how we laugh, or how we cry is something that we learn. And we learn that within the context of a society, and we refer to that as national culture. And we also learn some of our behaviors within the context of an organization. We refer to that as organizational culture. For instance, how you write your emails, how you send your emails, how you even address people. You could actually learn those things from your organization. You could also learn things like punctuality or things like even diligence from your organization. And if I would also make a reference again to my research, my doctoral research, I actually found out that a number of respondents indicated to me that they learned certain work habits from the organizations that they worked in. So culture can be national, societal, or can be organizational, can also be at the level of districts and cities and all that. And then you now have personality. Now, your personality is a combination of your natural tendencies as a human being, in terms of things like whether you are naturally extroverted or naturally introverted, or if you are naturally agreeable or maybe a bit confrontational as a person, plus the cultures that you grew in. So it's important for us to understand that your personality is not the same with your culture. You hear some certain individuals say, this is my personal culture. No, there's no such thing as a personal culture, because culture is a shared phenomenon. You can only say culture when you are sharing it with others, right? So culture is a shared phenomenon. Now, that said, it is possible to have people who have personality types within a particular culture, and they might resemble people within another culture with a different personality type. And I'm not going to go into that into more detail, but it's important for us to understand that when you're dealing with a human being, don't assume that a human being, being a Nigerian, will behave, in quote, like every other Nigerian. You will see Nigerians behaving not like Nigerians, or you see Dutch people behaving not like Dutch people, or South Africans behaving not like South Africans, in quote. It's important to understand that. Now, talking about culture, there are various models, but I'm going to talk about Geert Hofstede's model, which is the one that my organization, the Culture Factor, that we curate and we continually update. Geert Hofstede came up with 6 dimensions of culture. And he said that culture is not about good or bad. It's not about good or bad. It's rather about how societies or groups interpret or define good or bad. Right? It is the collective programming of the human mind, that distinguishes one group of people from another. Right? And he looked at 6 dimensions. I'm not going to define all of them now because of time, but I'll just mention them. There is power distance. There's individualism versus collectivism. The third one used to be known as masculinity versus femininity, but we've actually changed the name now, and we no longer refer to it as masculinity versus femininity. Because of this day and age, we refer to it as motivation towards achievement and success, which basically looks at consensus-seeking societies versus decisive societies. There's uncertainty avoidance, there's long-term orientation, there's indulgence versus restraint. However, for the sake of looking at high and low context cultures, we will focus on the first two, power distance and collectivism, individualism versus collectivism. Power distance and individualism versus collectivism. Power distance is the extent to which the people in a society, the weaker members of the society, allow those people who have access to power to have their way. So we distinguish between hierarchical societies and egalitarian societies. Hierarchical societies score high on that dimension. On a scale of 0 to 100, they score above 50, above 60. Egalitarian societies score below 50 on that dimension. So, and I would show you a few examples I had mentioned. We had mentioned in the information about today's session that we will be looking at a few countries like the Netherlands, Nigeria, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, the UK, and the US. So we'll compare those countries on power distance. And then the second one, individualism versus collectivism, talks about the relationship of the society when it comes to groups, how the society views the need to belong to in-groups in the society. So you have societies that are individualistic, which places less emphasis on groups. In other words, you have loose affiliations with extended family, with members of your community, or members of your workplace or your church. You have your personal life, your personal space, and you value it a lot. For you, family, in the individualistic societies, family basically means me, my spouse, and my children, and that's family. Versus collectivist societies. Collectivist societies are more collective. So family means perhaps everyone from my village, and you would refer to them as my brother. Or people in the office will also be referred to as brother and sister. The connections are stronger. The bonds are stronger. You value being a part of a group are much more than people in individualistic societies. So just a quick recap again: high power distance, hierarchical; low power distance, egalitarian. Individualistic means, you think for yourself, you're on your own. Collectivist groups are important. Okay, now let's compare countries on these two paradigms. Remember again, when we're talking about culture, we're not talking about good or bad. It's really important to say this. There's no culture that is good. There's no culture that is bad. We're just different from each other. The misunderstanding that we have when it comes to culture is because these differences exist. If we can understand the differences, then it will be easier for us to get along, and not to categorize one culture as being good and another culture as being bad. When you're within the cultural context, it's important for you to know how to work and to lead within that context. So we have compared some countries over here. Those countries that are high power distance, we have placed them on the scale, and those countries that are low power distance, we have also placed them in the scale. And then those countries that are high on individualism and those countries that are low on individualism, the collectivist countries, we've also put them there. So what you see, basically, in terms of the power distance, and I think I must apologize, I got the graph wrong here because it's supposed to be the other way around. So if you could just let me, I really, really apologize. I thought I got this right. It's the other way around, actually. Apologies. So this is how it should be. Yeah. Great. So we have that here. Yeah, so we have Nigeria, which is a high power distance country, scores 80 of power distance, but scores 0 in individualism. Nigeria actually, currently with our latest round of research, Nigeria is the most individualistic, collectivist country, scores the least in individualism in the world. The Netherlands, on the other hand, scores 100 on individualism and scores about 40 on power distance. So in other words, Nigeria and the Netherlands are basically on the opposite ends of the table, opposite ends of the spectrum. In other words, it's difficult for Nigerians and Dutch people to get along, but we do get along, and I will explain why. You see, South Africa is just on the line when it comes to power distance. Yeah, South Africa is just borderline in power distance, and then on individualism, South Africa is somewhere around 25 on individualism. So South Africa is a collectivist country, but low power distance. The USA, you can see 60, and in terms of individualism, but in power distance, low at 40. And you see other countries there. China, not very similar to Nigeria as well. Power distance very high, individualism is low, collectivist as well. So you see the UK, the US, Germany, Netherlands, very similar. Nigeria, Suriname, China, Saudi Arabia, South Africa on the line. Again, a bit similar in a sense. France is an outlier, very interesting outlier, quite different from the other countries. And if you have worked with the French, you would understand exactly what I mean. Quite different from the Netherlands, quite different from the UK. But it's quite interesting to see this. Now, what does this mean? High context cultures are those cultures in which when you want to express yourself, you need to be aware of what is not being said. The communication in high context cultures is indirect communication in high context cultures. As the word suggests, high context. You need to put a lot into mind before you say what you want to say. In low context cultures, on the other hand, you say it as it is. You're direct, you tell people what you feel, how you feel, whenever you feel. Now, how do we differentiate between high context and low context cultures? In high context cultures, there is a lot of implicit communication. It is indirect. You don't say what you want to say exactly. You read the room. You smell the air. You read the air in the room before you say what you want to say. Quite different from low context cultures. The Netherlands, Germany, UK, USA, low context. Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, China, Suriname, South Africa to a large extent, high context. You read the room before you say what you want to say, unlike in the UK and the Netherlands. In high context cultures, relationships are more important than the tasks. So it's more important for you to have a good relationship with the people you're working with than the work that needs to be done. Quite different from low context cultures. Teamwork and team bonding is more emphasized than in low context cultures. In low context cultures, the individual's needs and priorities are more emphasized. It doesn't mean that they don't emphasize teamwork. It just means that compared to high context cultures, they don't emphasize it that much. And then when it comes to decision making, in high context cultures, there has to be a lot of consultation because the decision making is communal. However, because high context cultures are typically very hierarchical as well, once the boss has said it, everybody lines up. Everybody lines up. Yeah? It's a communal decision. If you want to go against that decision, you are going to be in a lot of soup because everybody else will put pressure on you to side with what the boss has said. Right? In low context cultures, again, there's a lot of consultation, but the difference here is that the decision making is individualistic and it is role-based or expertise-based. So you might have a lot of argument in low context cultures because in such cultures, you need to explain clearly why that decision that is being taken is the right decision. So when you want to lead in high context versus low context cultures, what are the things that you need to be aware of? Now, if you're coming from a low context culture and you're going to a high context culture, please remember that the workplace is like a family. It's like another home. The people in the workplace, they see themselves as relatives in a sense. They see the workplace as another family. The ideal boss, if you're a leader in a high context culture, in Nigeria, in Saudi Arabia, in China, you are considered like a father, what some people would define as a benevolent dictator. And please don't take that term wrongly. As a father, you make decisions. You make decisions, and then you don't really need to explain it to your staff, but you basically pat them on the back and tell them, hey, don't worry, I have your best interest at heart. And if you have built the relationship, if you have developed the relationship, they will trust you enough to allow you to make decisions without challenging those decisions. When you want to correct people, please avoid blaming them in public or sending a group email and pointing out someone's faults. If you want to correct people in high context cultures, best thing to do is to call them aside if you need to and talk one-on-one. In high context cultures, you usually will avoid saying no directly. So what would you say if you don't say no directly? You say, well, that's a good idea. Let me think about it. And perhaps we might also consider other options. It's really important to consider that in high context cultures, because that word no tends to mean rejection. The person will not only see that as your decision, the person would interpret that in many cases as the boss doesn't like me. You invest time in building relationships because, like we said, relationships are more important than tasks. When you meet people or when you're writing to people, you must ensure not to avoid greetings. Say dear, say hello. You might want to avoid using hi or not greeting at all. So you want to write an email, don't just write okay, as we discussed. We said, hi, okay, how are you? I hope you're doing well. As we discussed, then you can carry on with your conversation. And then, of course, when it comes to working, when you want to escalate, you use hierarchy and you match hierarchy as well, right? Who you are to us is probably more important than what you do in high context cultures, and the opposite, of course, in low context cultures. In low context cultures, the work is a workplace, the office is a workplace, the boss is just a colleague with a different title. In other words, not a dictator, just a skilled negotiator. They have to ensure that they get everybody on the same page before decisions are made. The staff won't mind getting into it, arguing either in a group email or directly in a meeting. Communication is direct, explicit. Yes is yes, no is no. Communication is functional. You have to keep it functional. You should expect staff to take initiative and to consult you less, unlike in high context cultures. And in low context cultures, what you do is what matters, not who you are. We don't really care about who you are or your position. What we care about is what you do. So that is it from me about high context and low context cultures. And I will give the floor now to Tuan to get Graham in to give us reflections. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Okey. Thank you for this presentation. I would like Graham to reflect upon what has been said.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And what a pleasure, of course, to be on Good Morning BSN. Thank you, Dr. Okey, for the excellent presentation. When working in low context culture, it is important to be aware of the potential barriers. There are strategies that can help navigate and overcome these differences. One effective strategy is to establish open lines of communication and encourage frequent check-ins with colleagues, team members. This allows for questions or concerns to be addressed early on and prevent misunderstandings or escalating. Another approach, of course, is to provide clear instructions and expectations, whether through written documentation or verbal communication. This helps ensure everyone understands their roles and responsibilities reducing the likelihood of confusion and mistakes. It's also helpful to approach situations with a mindset of cultural sensitivity and understanding. Being patient and willing to learn about different perspectives can also go a long way in building strong relationships with co-workers from diverse backgrounds. By implementing these strategies, individuals can effectively navigate low context cultures within the workplace while promoting mature respect and understanding among colleagues. In conclusion, effective communication is the backbone of any successful organization, and it becomes even more crucial in a devastating or for businesses for financially and opportunity. However, understanding how to navigate these cultural differences can lead to more effective collaboration and ultimately better business outcomes. While navigating through a low context culture may seem challenging at first, it's important, of course, to remember that with patience and persistence comes success. By being aware of these cultural differences and implementing strategies such as active listening, clear communication channels, and concise messaging, we can bridge a gap, the gap between cultures for improved workplace communication, ultimately leading us on a path towards stronger relationship with our colleagues worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graham. Sorry, I was on mute. The questions are coming in. The first question I've got is from John Lodder. John, can you share your question with us, and we want to ask it?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I admire, I like your presentation. Thank you for that. It's very beautiful for me. But I wonder, Van Strompenaars talks about reconciliation. And I wonder how it is in, let's say, Hofstede's view or your opinion about reconciliation. How do you achieve that?
So I would say the most important thing is understanding. And we always do what we say to leaders particularly is, before you speak particularly, you need to bear in mind your cultural biases. As an individual, you might not be aware, but you do have cultural biases. And you should also be aware of the cultural context of the person that you are about to communicate with. So a good example will be somebody does something wrong in the office and I want to correct them. If I am Dutch, very, very likely, I will say to the person, you've done something wrong, do this and correct it, which is okay in the Netherlands. But in Nigeria, that is not the way to do it, right? You call the person aside and you say, can you show me what you have done? Okay, I see that you have done your best over here, but we could improve on this other side, right? So you're getting the same, hopefully you're getting the same result, but with a different approach. And the only way that you can do that is to switch on that awareness in your mind. Hey, I cannot do things as normal. I have to say it in a different way. And the simple reason why I have to say it in a different way is because this person sees things differently from me. So I believe that that is how reconciliation can be achieved. You can achieve it by being aware of the differences, that those differences exist. The only challenge, John, is unfortunately when we are under high stress situations, we tend to forget about that those differences exist. When things have to be done very quickly and the workload is heavy, we forget that we are in Nigeria. We just think that we're back in the Netherlands and we say things the way we want to say things. And that's when we get problems. Yeah. But even when such things happen, when the tempers and everything has cooled, go back and make amends. Go back and make amends. Talk to the person. I'm so sorry that I spoke to you in that way. Where I come from, we talk very directly, but I understand that things are a little bit different here. Please remember that I value you as a colleague, high context, I value you as a colleague. We having a relationship here, work relationship here is important to me. I want to make sure that we do our best together. And I tell you, if you're the boss and you say that to your employee, you will see their performance skyrocket the next day. And all the Nigerians who are on the call will guarantee that I'm telling the truth when it comes there. Nothing gives more impetus to work in high context cultures than praise from the boss. Praise from the boss gives a lot of motivation. It gives a lot of motivation because in such cultures, you want to be accepted by the boss. You want to be accepted by the boss. But if the boss's communication looks like rejection, you feel really, really bad. You feel really, really disappointed in yourself as a person. I hope that answers to some extent, Doc.
Very clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John, for asking the questions. There are a lot of compliments coming in for Graham and Okey, but we're still open for questions. We still have got like 7 minutes left. So if you want to state your question, please raise your hand or put it into the chat. For now, I've got a question, Okey, I think. Graham, you might want to jump in on this one as well. If I look at today's society, I see that a lot of groups are formed, and mainly international groups. So it's not like there's one guy walking into a Nigerian office and having to adapt to the situation over there, but there's like 5 or 6 or 7 cultures into a meeting. What do you do? So do you adapt and try to find the middle ground, or do you just accept the differences and try to, let's say, work with what's being said? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so we call that the United Nations, the United Nations Challenge. So you are sitting in the UN Assembly. How do you make a speech? You have the Dutch people here, you have the Americans there, you have the Chinese, and you have the Japanese, and you have the Nigerians, and everybody. Our recommendation is, and I'm not making a plug for my organization now, but as much as possible in an organization, get intercultural understanding training for everybody. Yeah, because when everybody is culturally aware, or aware that differences exist, then they will be more tolerant. They will be more tolerant of the other culture. They will be more tolerant of the other culture. So that's the word, that's the key word. And tolerance basically comes from a place of understanding. If I understand that I might appear rude in my speaking, I will be much more careful when I speak. So that's what I would say, that ensure that everybody has that understanding so that for whatever it's worth, when I'm giving information, I am a bit more measured in my communication. And when I'm receiving information, I'm also a bit more understanding and forgiving in the reception of information. So if everybody has some training, some awareness, then it makes it easy for us to communicate.
Makes sense. Graham, some comments?
Yeah, Dr. K, I have to agree there with you. Of course, 100%. You have to familiarize yourself, of course. If you're going abroad, going anywhere, you have to know and understand the different cultures. And at some point, you have to meet half point to know what you're going to be and what your next step will be. So it is important to learn the different culture of where you're going to.
Thank you. I got a comment from George Woods. He's stating, I would imagine globalization has impacted culture across the world. So I think that's a statement, not a question. But I've got a question from Bumoga Sarhai. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Bumoga, can you state your question?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, okay, so I'd like to know what is responsible for organizations classed as high context cultures operating as low context culture organizations. Because we have a lot of organizations that, are brands, supposedly high context culture organizations. But when you get into these organizations, the culture, there is low context. So I'm just curious, what could be responsible?
The leaders. That's a simple answer. The leaders of the organization. The leaders of the organization, where they grew up, what cultures they are exposed to, their cultural preferences will have a lot to say in the organization. Plus, you also have instances where people actually select people who are similar to them. So I'm not going to take too much time on this, but there's something we call cultural preferences, which basically means even though I grew up in Nigeria, born and raised in Nigeria, it is actually possible that I might prefer the Dutch culture. It is possible that even though I was raised in Nigeria, I might prefer the Dutch culture. And if I were to emigrate to the Netherlands, I might just blend into the Dutch society very easily. You do have such instances occurring. So if you have a group of people in an organization in Nigeria who tends to prefer the Dutch culture, for instance, and it is actually possible to get 10 million Nigerians who are Dutch in their minds, because Nigeria is 220 million people. The Netherlands is, please correct me if I'm wrong, is it 20 million or 16 million?
Yeah, 17 or something.
17. So the Netherlands is less than 10% of the population of Nigeria. So technically speaking, statistically, there will be more Nigerians who think like Dutch people than Dutch people, actually. So you could actually find Dutcherians, if you will call them that, in Nigeria. If you bring them together and you put an organization up, very, very likely that organization could prefer low context cultures. Abumoha, sorry about the shortened explanation, but because of time, I had to make it very brief.
Yeah.
No problem, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you. We just have got like a couple of minutes left. I have one last question we can answer. Okey Okere, can you please take your question?
I think Okey has it.
It's Jeanne Volskenk that I'm asking. Jeanne Volskenk, can you ask her question?
Hi. I was just wondering, because I've done this now actually in my degree, this culture model, and I found it very interesting. However, do you think each new generation blurs the lines a bit of the culture? Just think when I grew up and the way my kids grow up, you know, we've got our culture, our South African culture, but it's like, because we stay in the UK now for the past 6 years, so it kind of like blurs. I keep myself reminding, telling them, remember, you're South African. This is the way we do it. We've got respect and whatever. But do you think that's got an impact? I mean, are we going to look 50 years back onto this model and say, it's all outdated, the children or the new generation changed?
I'm going to answer your question, Larry's question, and there's one more question about globalization in one word. Cultures are changing at the same, well, not at the same, but generally in the same rate at different countries. So Americans are changing, South Africans are changing, Dutch people are changing, people from the UK, Nigerians are changing. So if the Nigerian children are becoming less power distant, the American children are also becoming less power distant. The South African children are becoming less power distant. So it's like -2, -2, -2 across. At the end of the day, we will end up, you know, where we started. Yeah. So the differences will always be there, provided nations exist. However, what is changing the world now is immigration. Immigration is changing the world. So you go into the UK, you are contributing to changing the culture of the UK. Just like people who are going to Canada are changing the culture of Canada, and people are changing the culture of America. Yeah. So rather than globalization, as immigration occurs, especially drastic, large numbers of immigration, then you will see significant changes in cultures. But how many countries are very tolerant to immigrants? Big question. You can think about that.
It's a good question to end this Zoom now with, Okey. It's exactly 8:53, so we have to stop now. Thank you all for participating. Thank you so much, Okey and Graham, for being on this show. Next week, we're going to talk about leading with insight, and especially about successful leaders in the AI revolution. So hopefully you will join in next week. Thank you for participating today, and see you next time. Yeah. Thank you.